but let me know if you guys have any questions. So we're going to talk about debugging. The debugging comes from the term for bug or computer bug. This was first coined by a computer programmer named Grace Hopper, who was a very influential programmer and language designer. And when she was working on a program, it didn't run, and it was because there was a bug that was stuck in one of the electrical circuits in the computer that they had. So this was back in like the 40s, when computers were really, really big and made up of these like very large circuits. And so there's a literal bug, which we can see taped into the log. This is also a pre-digital computer log. So people would actually write stuff out on these pieces of paper to say what happened when they ran the program and fix things and figure it out. So that's why we call it bugs, because of an actual literal bug that was stuck in a computer. And bugs refer to when our program doesn't work the way we want it to. We call that a bug. And so the process of figuring out what's wrong is called debugging. In JavaScript, one of the things that is unique with this language is that it was designed to be like easy to use and learn very quickly. And so unlike other languages, there are not very many fatal errors. A fatal error is when you see the red text, and it means that your program is not going to run. In JavaScript, a lot of things can go wrong, but it'll still keep trying to go. And so that actually makes it more challenging in some ways, because if we don't know, but if our program doesn't run, then we know for sure that it's not working, and we can kind of try to figure out why. What it can be more confusing is our program might be running, but it's not doing what we want it to. So in JavaScript, we have to first think about whether the bug is something that is, an error that we're getting in our console, or is our program just not doing what we think it should do. So the console is our sort of resource or tool that we can use to help us debug our program. In the web editor, the console is down here, but as we've seen before, any website that you're on, if you hit Command Option J or go into your tools and find the developer tools, you can use the console here. So all the browsers have console built in, and the console is not something that people who are just viewing the program look at. The console is something that developers use to understand what's happening in the program. So we can create an error very easily. If I say x plus 1 and I try to run this, nothing happens. And if I look in my console, I get this reference error, x is not defined. So that's what a bug usually looks like. If we don't have the console open, we will not see the bug. And so we always want to have the console open. When I'm not working in P5, I spend most of my time, not as much these days, but when I was a freelancer, I made a lot of websites using JavaScript. And so I basically always had this console open all the time. Because instead of something not working and then opening it, you'll see the errors immediately and know that you're going to have an error. If you're on Chrome, you can hit Command Option J, and that'll open right there. But you can also go through the menu and go to Tools and go to Developer Tools. Sometimes this will open up to here, the HTML and CSS inspector. So you just move over to the console. Sometimes you can't see that if it looks like this, and so you have to grab this drop down here. But it's a little bit different on different browsers. But anyway, we have the console in P5, so we don't need to have that open. But so if we have an error in our code, it'll try to tell us what's wrong. It's not going to tell us exactly what's wrong, but it'll try to give us a sense of, it'll tell us why the computer sees this as an error. And the other thing that's really useful is right here. It actually tells us what line it's on. So if I had some working code up here, if I had, you know, variable banana equals orange. Hey, Jaden. Can you, Jaden? Hey, buddy. If you need to sleep, can you do it outside, please? Okay, so if I have some working code, now this line changes. So it changes from 1 to 2. So it actually tells me what line of the program has the error. So I can go find it. So the console is really useful for looking at errors. So part of what we want to do when we're debugging, part of it is kind of the mindset. Sometimes programming is very, very frustrating. If you get really frustrated when your program is not working or doing what you want it to do, sometimes it's good to leave the computer, even for just a minute, and then come back. I can't tell you how many times I've been working on something and I'm running into some crazy bug and I stay up until like 6 in the morning trying to fix it and I can't figure it out. And then the next day I come back and I look at it and it's just like I spelled something wrong and I just couldn't see it. So your brain, as you work on stuff, your brain gets into a certain space and you can't always see things objectively. And so it's always good if you have a bug to, take a walk or get some water or something like that and reset how you're seeing things. So once you do that, the first thing to do, actually, even before you do anything else, we want to frame the bug not as it's not doing stuff. We want to say, what did we expect was going to happen and what is happening instead? So sometimes it's like I expected my program to, do something and it's not doing anything. So that's, how we want to start by framing what do we think is supposed to happen and is that happening or not, and then go from there. Yeah. Yeah, debugging is like 90% of programming. I don't know about 90%, but it's a big part of it. Let's see what how much time do programmers there we go. Around 50%. Okay, so I overestimated a little bit. It kind of depends. I mean, it depends on how you frame debugging, but like just to give an example, like this morning I was working on an animation, and part of the animation is I have these birds and they go in this like flocking pattern, and so there's these different physics that happen, and for some reason everything was working except the birds were backwards, and so it took me about an hour, maybe less, to write the program that told them what direction to move in. And it took me like 3 hours to figure out why they were backwards. And I eventually figured it out, but that's an aspect of how programming works. That wasn't a typo. I was rotating. So the birds are kind of like going like this, and they're flying away from each other and then towards each other. And they have like a target that they're going for. And I was calculating the velocity to that target, but I was calculating it backwards. So I was calculating, instead of the difference between where the bird is and where they're going, I was calculating the difference between where they're going and where the bird is. So it's essentially the same thing as a typo. I had written it backwards, and if I had been able to, notice that originally, it would have taken me 2 seconds. But I don't know if I spent 3 hours, but it felt like 3 hours. It was very annoying. Anyway, it's a lot of debugging. So if you're good at it, you'll save a lot of time. Okay, so the first thing we do is we check the console for errors. So if you don't have your console open and you have this whole program, let's say we are gonna, or I'll just say function setup create. I don't know if this is actually gonna break it enough. We'll see. Okay, so if I have this really cool program that I'm waiting to run, It did actually draw. So that's what I'm saying about JavaScript is kind of annoying because I do have this error here, but it still ran this function here. So let me see if I can get an error that'll actually break this. What if I just put, well, I'll just spell create canvas wrong. That'll break it. Okay. Anyway, sometimes, you know, you have some code and it looks right, but we don't see anything over here. And if you don't have the console open, we don't know that there's an error. So if I have the console open, I'm going to see that there's actually, oh, okay, there's 2 errors. So that's why I don't see anything over here. So the first thing to do is look at the console to see errors. In the console, sometimes you see warnings. Warnings are yellow. Warnings are fine. You probably want to deal with them eventually, but they won't break your program. So if you see yellow text, you can usually ignore it unless you're really like trying to optimize stuff. But if you see red text, then you probably need to fix it. Although, as you can see, even if I fix this error, so it'll run. So it's drawing my circle, but I have this other error. So that's one of the annoying, or it's not annoying depending on how you think about it. With JavaScript, you can have errors, but the other parts of the program are still gonna run. So you might not even notice that this is an error until, you know, much later. Like actually, if I tried to use X, so let's say I said ellipse X. Yeah, I just put X in there. So that's, I mean, that's the same error. X is still not defined. So now it doesn't run. Anyway, so if we don't see any errors in the console, that means that we have what's called a conceptual gap. Okay, so there's no technical problem with the code, but there's a gap between what we want to happen and what we've written to happen. So that can be harder to figure out if you think it's supposed to be doing one thing and it's doing another. Like earlier when I had my birds were backwards, I didn't have any problems with my code, but I hadn't calculated what I had intended to calculate. Okay, so then we read our error, we take a look at the line if we understand what's going on. So another thing that's really useful when we're writing code is console.log. So let's say in this example, I'm going to start a new sketch actually. So let's say I have this example and I want to draw an ellipse at X and 200 and 200. Okay, so if I try to do that, that's an obvious error. There's no such thing as X. But let's say I have a variable called X somewhere in my program. Let's say I declared X over here, and then I forgot about it. Okay, so P5 actually has a nice little warning for me. This is not part of JavaScript. This wouldn't be in the regular JavaScript console, but P5 has like extra little helpers that it has built into it. So it says, ellipse was expecting number for the first parameter, received an empty variable instead. Okay, so I don't have an error. I don't have a red error. My program is running, but there's no ellipse on the screen. And so this is a conceptual gap. So there's no technical problem with my code, but what's really the problem is that X, I'm trying to use this thing called X, but X doesn't have a value. And if P5 wasn't helping me out, let me see if I can actually turn off. No, I can't turn off those hints. Anyway, if I wasn't in P5, if I was in something else, what I could do here is I could say, okay, I have this program, it's not working, there's really not that much happening, and this is the thing that doesn't work. The ellipse is not drawing. There should be an ellipse. So what I could do is I could console.log, and I can really log any part of this. I could say, well, maybe ellipse isn't a function. So let's console.log ellipse and see if that's a function. Well, yeah, it looks like a function. If it wasn't a function, like if I had misspelled it, I would get an error. It would say ellipse is not defined. So ellipse is a function, so that's not my problem. So let's go to the next thing. Is X a value? Well, if I log X, I'll see that X is undefined. And so now, even though I'm not getting an error, I have a better understanding of, well, my ellipse isn't drawing because the number I'm trying to use, this variable X, doesn't exist. There's no value there. Another thing that is useful, if you're logging a bunch of different stuff, you can do labels, and that's pretty easy to do. So let's say I wanted to log, let's say I had X and Y, and I wasn't sure which one is not working. So if I said console.log x and then console.log y, I would just see that they're both undefined. So that doesn't really tell me anything. But what if y was 10? Okay, so now I see one thing is undefined and one thing's 10, but I don't know which is which, right? So you can use labels. You can put as many things into the console.log as you want to. You just have to separate them by commas. So if I wanted to know which this is, I can put the string x as a label, and then after that put x. I can put the string y as a label, and after that put y. And you can put whatever you want here. So I could say, is x a number? You know, I can say whatever I want, but the main point is that this will help me seeing that, okay, y is 10, so that's not the problem. X is undefined. So if you're logging multiple things, you can do that, but it's helpful to use labels so you can see, you know, what is what, because otherwise it's just showing me a number, and that number doesn't tell me if it's X or Y on its own. Okay, so that's console.log. There's a bunch of other things you can do with console.log or the console, but that's kind of the main one that we're going to use. Okay, so if we've done those two steps and we don't know what's going on, then it's time to do some research. And the best place to do research is Stack Overflow. If you go on Stack Overflow and you say X is undefined and tell it you're not a robot, you're going to start to see a lot of stuff. The first thing is JavaScript, so that's useful. But if it wasn't JavaScript, you could click on this. You could click on this tag, and so you can actually search for a specific language. So if I put JavaScript here and then say X is undefined, now I can see only results that have JavaScript as a tag. So I can get better results that way. So Stack Overflow is the main site. If you Google basically any code, like let's say I have an error. Let's bring back my old error. Let's say z plus 1. So if I copy this, as long as it's not too specific, if I copy this, and usually I'll put JavaScript in front of it, so I'll say JavaScript and then paste my error. This is actually MDN, which is good, but the next thing is Stack Overflow. So you're usually going to get stuff in here. As you do this, you'll get better at seeing like what is related to what you're looking for versus not. You could also put like P5 here. There might be a lot of answers related to P5. So here's an answer, JavaScript P5. So the way that these sites usually work, Stack Overflow in particular, is that somebody adds a question. They say, I have this error or something's not doing what I want. And then people write responses. And then people can vote on the responses. So it's sort of like Reddit, if you've ever used Reddit. So usually the best responses will be at the top because the most people will vote for them. This doesn't have a lot of stuff on it, so we could look for another one. This is one that has a lot. So you can see there's a question. You can see a lot of people upvoted this question, so they also have this question. And then this is the most popular answer. It's also the green check means that the original person who asked the question has said this is the answer, basically. So sometimes a lot of people vote for something, but it's not the accepted answer. But you can see the other answers as well. And, you know, when I'm like debugging some really obscure thing, you know, I'll be reading through all of these different responses to see, you know, different ideas if the first idea doesn't work for me. Okay, so then ask somebody else. Getting somebody else to look at your code is really useful because they will probably notice things like typos or other errors. I've seen a lot of errors. I've been teaching programming for many years, and so I've seen most of the errors. So a lot of time if something's not working for you and I'll look at it, I'll know exactly why. So asking somebody who has some level of expertise or just has fresh eyes can be really helpful. Taking a break, as I mentioned, refresh your brain. Don't delete your code. This is not as big of an issue as it used to be when we were using files on our computer. now that we have P5, you can just duplicate your sketch. But that's what I'd recommend doing. If you've been working on a project for a long time, this is a little bit of a different context because right now our programs are very short. But as you write more and more code, eventually you'll have programs that are very complex. And if you have a bug and it's bothering you, you might want to make a copy of it so that you don't like change a bunch of stuff and then it doesn't work and then you don't have what you had before. So always remember, you can go to File, Duplicate, and do whatever you want, and you can always go back to the original that you duplicated. We talked about console.log. A few more errors that you're going to see, so we can demonstrate some errors. So this one is a reference error. This means that a variable that we're trying to work with, z in this case, just doesn't exist. So if we try to reference anything that doesn't exist, if I try to say banana plus orange, that's going to be a reference error because banana isn't anything. Okay, if banana has quotation marks around it, then it's a thing. It's a string that says banana. So that's fine. I'm still getting an error because of this, but this code is fine. If I say banana plus orange without that quotation mark, then oranges should be a variable, and it's not. So that's when we get a reference error. It's when we're trying to reference something that doesn't exist. Let's close that. Syntax error is when you just like don't have the right syntax. So if I had like 2 pluses in a row or something like that. Oh, I'm getting a reference error because that. Oh, I guess I can do 2 pluses in a row. What if I do a plus and then a. What if I do 3 pluses in a row? Huh. I guess I can do as many pluses as I want. Okay, let's say I just have banana orange. There's a syntax error. You can't have 2 strings just sitting next to each other for no reason. If we have 2 strings next to each other, they have to be either added together or, you know, compared or something like that. Another reference error would be if I just had like a number right here. So a syntax error is just when you have some syntax that's not supposed to be there. So if I had like a random, like a quotation mark, but no closing quotation mark, that's going to be a syntax error. Because I have this quotation mark, but I don't have another closing quotation mark associated with it. So that's just when I have my syntax out of order. Failed to load resource. We're not going to see this for a while, but sometimes you'll try to load an image. Like, let's say I tried to load an image, and I said, dog.jpg or something like that. Then I'm going to get this error that says, oh, this error is kind of buried inside. So sometimes you'll see something like this. If you open up this little arrow, you'll see more information. But I actually don't see the actual error here. Anyway, sometimes you'll get an error that says failed to load resource if you have a resource that you spelled it wrong or it's in the wrong place. And then nan, we saw nan earlier. Nan is when you try to do math with something that's not a number. So if I say 10 plus 10, oh, I still have this. Let me get rid of this load image error. Oh, I guess this doesn't care. Oh, because I can't actually do 10 plus 10. I need to do 10 times 10. Okay. Let's say variable a equals 10 times 10, and then console.log a. Okay, that's how we get nan. So nan just means not a number. So that's when we try to do some type of math on something, like a string, that's not a number. That's some that you'll probably see it at some point. Okay, so let's get into our debugging challenge. So basically what I've done is created a sketch, and it should look like this, but right now it doesn't look like anything. So if you click on this link, it'll take you to this sketch, and if you run this, you're gonna see there's an error. And there's like maybe 15 or 20 different errors. Some of them are errors like this, where you'll get some red text and you'll go look at the line and you'll go fix it. So for example, this syntax error says you're missing a parentheses, and it says it's on line 19. So for this first error, I would go to line 19, and I would look at this fill, and I'd say, you know, it looks like there is a parentheses there. So what's wrong? I'll let you guys figure that out. So there's a, what? So there's a bunch of errors, and when you finish fixing all the errors, you should see this image when you run the sketch. So you should go to this link. It's right here, debugging exercise on the schedule. And once you open it, it's going to be on my account. Just go to File and Duplicate. And so you'll create a copy on your account. And then you can go through and fix the errors. We're going to do that in class. When you're done, you can just submit this link to the finished exercise on Blackboard. You don't have to make an OpenLab post for this. Just submit that on Blackboard. And that shouldn't take too long. If it should take like maybe 20 minutes, half an hour. And so you should have some more time to work on the assignment for this week. If you don't, that's fine. But anyway, so work on this first. And then once you're done, you can work on the assignment. If you have any questions, ask your neighbor. Or if your neighbor doesn't know, you can ask me. And we can figure it out. So remember to look in the console. Remember, some of the errors are not going to be, red text. They're going to be things that you have to figure out. Yeah, that's what we're going to do now. Any questions? Okay. So yeah, just go open that up. If you need help getting to that link, let me know. I'll come help you.